Okay, hello there, and welcome to another Pyro seminar. Just going to wait a second, make sure all the technology is working. That looks like it is. And also, thank you. If you're watching this, you're likely supporting me on Patreon, which allows me to do these seminars. And so I really appreciate that. So your support means that I can kind of create this content and more stuff. And I'm very excited about this seminar because I think Luke, actually one of my patrons, said that this is one of the reasons why he's supporting me. I guess because he wants to hear how I interact with other philosophers, other theologians. And lots of people have asked me to engage with the work of René Girard and asked me what connections there are between my own work and his work. And I've kind of avoided looking at that because I know René Girard's work a little, but I haven't developed my thinking on it that much. I have certain resonances with it, and then certain differences. But it was actually only when I read Zizek's latest work, Incontinence of the Void, which I think you can see here, that really clarified for me kind of what I really love about Girard's work and where I think it needs to be supplemented. So we're gonna dive into that. The plan is for me to really give an overview of Girard's kind of main contribution to religious studies and theology, and then draw in the supplement that Zizek brings to that and that psychoanalytic theory can add to it to kind of create an interesting atonement theory. And that's what we're really talking about here. We're going to be doing atonement theories, but we're using two thinkers who are not traditionally thought of as theologians. So they're not doing atonement theory in the way that you would find in the confessional church. They're doing something else, and potentially something much more interesting. That's what I'm going to try to argue anyway. So just as a background, I'll be referencing a little bit from Girard's book, Things Hidden Since the Foundations of the World, and also Zizek's Incontinence of the Void. And then as a really good secondary source, I'm going to be referencing Deporteur's Christ in Postmodern Philosophy. So all of those books I think are really important, and you might want to kind of dig into them after this is over. All right, let's get started. Let's see how we get on. To start with, René Girard is and was like a fascinating intellectual. He was really a literary theorist, historian, and anthropologist, but his work really, he's one of those thinkers where his work has impact and influence across a whole variety of disciplines. So you see his work in obviously literary theory, in anthropology, but also religious studies, in theology, in film theory. So you'll find that his work has really permeated a number of disciplines. And by the way, just to remind you, if you're watching live, at any point, please just make some comments in the Patreon section. Any questions you have, and then I'll have a look at them. Including if you can hear me or not. Occasionally there are problems with sound and I talk on, but yeah, seems like it's working. Rob is saying good morning Rob. So René Girard, this 20th century figure, the kind of mid to late 20th century, has this major influence in a variety of fields, including actually neuroscience and evolutionary biology. And I want to kind of delve into the reason why. So central to his work is this notion of mimesis, that we as human beings are brilliant at mimicking other things and other people, and that this is actually the very basis of society, of culture today, is that we would not be able to develop as a species if we weren't able to mimic and learn from other people. So, Richard Dawkins is interesting here. So in The Selfish Gene, Dawkins argues that, genes reproduce themselves from an evolutionary perspective. Evolution basically has three elements. The first is heredity, the second is variation, and the third is selection. So evolution is a type of blind algorithm with three elements, and as long as these three elements exist, then evolution is going to occur, which is in a sense development without teleology. So heredity is reproduction. Genes are able to reproduce. At a certain point, a gene is able to create another gene, right? Either an individual gene or two genes, whatever. Like, there is reproduction is able to take place. And then the second is variation. As long as what is reproduced varies in some small way from the original, that's variation. So whenever something reproduces, like in the everyday world, reproduction is a type of repetition. A dog gives birth to a dog, but that puppy is going to differ very slightly from the parent. They're going to be pretty much the same, but there's going to be slight variations and differences. And then the third element of evolution is selection, which means that this occurs in an environment which favours some variations over others. So in other words, some variations will survive better and some variations won't. So those are the three elements of evolution: heredity, variation, and selection. And so, Dawkins outlines this kind of simple evolutionary notion. But then he also suggests that there could be other things that engage in evolution, right? Not just genes, not just biological things. And he gives forth the example of ideas. That an idea, right, can be in my mind, and it's put there by books that I've read and people that I've listened to, and then I'm talking to you. So in some sense, right now, I am taking those ideas and they're being reproduced in your mind, but they're being reproduced with variation. So whenever this heredity element, this reproductive element, when the idea goes into your mind, it mixes with your past, your language, your reading, and it'll probably look a little bit different. So, I notice this all the time. People read my work and they'll get something very different out of the ideas, sometimes than I intended. And then thirdly, some of these ideas that we're constantly passing around in the world, in the social world, some of them will be favoured by the environment and some of them won't. So some ideas will catch on, like viral videos are a perfect example of this. There's millions of videos on YouTube. I think it's like 46 hours are uploaded every minute. No, not 46 hours, I think it's 46,000 hours, something like that, every minute onto YouTube. But some of these things that are uploaded, like, catch on, and people share them, and those people share them, and then they kind of become what's called a viral video. So and then other videos just don't go anywhere, just evolutionary dead ends. And from a kind of like a evolutionary perspective, some people posit that human beings really came into their own whenever they developed ideas, and those ideas were able to evolve, and that this actually partly explains the massive growth of our brains very, very quickly in evolutionary terms, and why we kind of like outpaced chimpanzees and all of that. So this notion of mimesis is very key to understanding human beings and how we operate, and it's everywhere. You see this, and it's different from what you see in other animals, which they can mimic each other as well, but the mimicry, there isn't any variation. So there's the passing on of something, but it doesn't vary and develop and become something else. So mimicry is this, it has these three elements: heredity, variation, selection. Now, Girard delves into this notion of mimetic acquisition. But then where his theory gets really interesting is when he talks about how human beings mimic desire. So we don't just mimic kind of ideas, we mimic the desire of the people around us. We learn how to desire by looking at what other people desire. So Girard is like nailing the coffin of the idea that desires spring spontaneously from us. That there is, he talks about like the desire springing forth ex nihilo from the divine ego, right? So which kind of is this image of like we just have these innate desires, and if you just let your child go with like all these different ideas and toys, they will naturally discover their own desire. And Girard is saying that no, actually desire is profoundly mimetic, that we learn how to desire and what to desire through looking at other people. Now, of course, advertisers, you see, the advertisers know this. Although advertisers don't know this, most advertisers aren't that smart. This is a good example of mimetic theory, is that some people sell products, right? And some of them just happen to try to sell a product by saying, look, this star likes that product. This cool person likes this product. And whenever they basically say, like, you should desire this toothpaste because, this person in a white coat who should be respected likes it, or this rock star likes this toothpaste, that toothpaste sells more than the rivals. And so what you get now, of course, in advertising is continually they're trying to evoke your desire for the product by showing that other people desire it, right? So you're always seeing other people in these adverts who you're supposed to identify with. If it's a medical product for people who are over 60, they'll have some cool guy who's over 60 who you're supposed to, relate to. They desire the product, and therefore, your desire, hopefully for the advertiser, attaches to that product as well. So mimetic desire, you can even see this with kids. You have kids in a playground, you give them toys, they'll start to desire the toys that other kids are playing with over and above their own. In fact, if you give children identical toys, they'll still start to desire the toys that the other people are playing with, even though the toys are all identical, because they desire the toy that the other child desires. So this is continually going on. For Girard, this is the very foundation of civilization. Without mimetic acquisition, mimetic desire, there would be no civilization, no society to speak of. But it causes a serious problem, because when you desire what other people desire, you then enter into conflict with them. Because if there's three elements here, there's me, there's you, and there's what you desire, what you have. I start to desire what you desire. Like maybe you're attracted to somebody, and although I don't realize it, I start to get attracted to them purely because you're attracted to them. So I am taking on your desire. And now we both desire the same person, and we're in rivalry. And so with mimetic desire, inherent to it is an originary violence. It causes conflict and antagonism. Over time, every society will erupt in a type of mimetic rivalry, because you're desiring what the other person desires, and they're desiring what you desire. Now, the question is, what do you desire in the product? And this happens, by the way, you can think of, there's so many examples of this. When you're going out with somebody, you often take on their desires. If they're interested in movies, certain movies, you might start to take an interest in that. If they're interested in philosophy, or if they're interested in outdoor activities, what happens is very gradually you start to take an interest. But you don't realize that it's because of them. You start to think that you just naturally desire that. So your desire feels like it's yours, and not like it's been bestowed upon you by other people. And that's why the conflict arises. Like, no, this is my desire. It's not a desire that you have given me. So this is continually occurring. and eventually we will enter into conflict because of it. Oh yeah, so what is it that we really are desiring? Now, Marx famously talks about commodities as having two aspects. They have use value and they have exchange value. So a commodity, which is anything, this camera, this chair, my mobile phone, a commodity has use value, which means that it has value in terms of what it can provide for me. So if it's a guitar, it's the use value is I can learn to play it, make music, I might want to be a musician or whatever, so it has a certain use value. And it also has an exchange value, which means it has a value in the marketplace. When I bring it into the marketplace, I can sell it for a certain amount of money. But there's this third dimension to a commodity, and Marx famously talks about it in Capital in section 4, chapter 1, one of the most famous writings of Marx. He talks about commodity fetishism, where he talks about commodities have metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties. So a commodity looks completely normal, but Marx says it's not. It's like magical, it's theological, it's religious. And so what does he mean by that? I think actually the work of René Girard can really unpack it to a certain extent. So let's call it a religious value. So for the sake of this seminar, you've got use value, which is the guitar. You can learn music, you can play it, you can kind of like use it to impress your partner, right? You've got exchange value, which is how much the guitar is worth on the market. And then there's the religious value. And the religious value is this notion that this product will somehow complete you, will somehow give you a plenitude of being. You feel that you're lacking in something, and this will provide it. Now, of course, not all commodities have this. Like, we just buy commodities, we drink coffee because we like the taste or we want to wake up. But some commodities take on a religious value. So say there's a guitar that David Bowie owned, right? Why is that worth phenomenally more money than any other guitar? Partly it's because for someone who's into David Bowie desired that guitar. And what we do for Girard is, in a sense, we have a sense of lack. And I've talked about that in other seminars, so I won't go into that. But we have to be human is to experience a lack of plenitude of being. There is something we're missing that's foundational to our subjectivity. We imagine that other people don't experience that other people have a plenitude of being, that other people can experience wholeness, completeness, and fullness. And we imagine that it's because of certain products. So we see someone who on an advert who's very happy and content because they've just bought this car. And we imagine, oh, that car is making them, it's giving them a certain wholeness and completeness that we lack. And so envy is, we therefore want to get that product. And if we have to, get rid of the person who owns it and take that product for ourselves. So with that guitar, if I'm a Bowie fan, I'm like, well, Bowie loved that guitar. His music was incredible. He had this plenitude of being. I want to be like David Bowie. This guitar, I desire it. I really want it. And so weirdly, it takes on a value that is beyond mere use value, because potentially it's no better than any other guitar of its kind, right? It's just exactly the same. But it takes on a value that is beyond mere use value. It takes on a metaphysical value, a religious value. But then I purchase it. And of course, it doesn't give me that, right? Products don't give me that. It's just an illusion. It's a semblance. It's a mask. So these products offer this promise that they can never fulfill. And that is, that's what Marx means by the kind of the metaphysical dimension of the commodity. It has this weird pull upon us. And Girard gives us a great way of understanding why that operates and how it operates, which is that it's connected to mimetic desire. We desire what the other desires. So, we start to get into conflict with other people. And Girard then postulates that in early society, what happened is rivalry would grow and grow and grow to the point at which there would be a fight and someone would die. And when the person was killed, briefly the community would stop their fighting, gather around the dead body, and everything would calm down. And partly it would calm down because if I kill you and then get your stuff, it doesn't work. Like I might enjoy your stuff briefly, but very quickly it kind of like it loses that religious dimension. It still has a use value, but it loses its religious value. But in that moment of the death of the other, that religious dimension of the commodity is weakened, and everyone calms down, things carry on as usual. But this continues to happen. And then Girard says, okay, so over time, a society that doesn't get destroyed through this mimetic rivalry will realize that this death of the other brings peace. And this is the birth of scapegoat mechanism. The birth of the scapegoat is when the community goes, there is a connection between the lowering of the violence that's part of society and the death of somebody. So this is where religion really comes into its own. Religion becomes the way of managing the violence, the founding violence of a community. And religion creates rituals, and the main ritual is sacrifice. The sacrificial ritual, something dies in order to bring harmony and peace and calmness back to the community. And then the community can be unified around that shared death. So now I'm no longer in conflict with you. This infant or this animal or this product is destroyed, and in that destruction, our mimetic rivalry kind of lowers, and the society can continue to function. So this is where religion is born. And then Girard says that mythology, he means in a very particular way, mythology is really the narrative that justifies this scapegoat mechanism, that justifies this way of dealing with the founding violence that we have. So in a nutshell, right, you've got mimetic acquisition, we learn through mimicking, we have mimetic desire, we learn what to desire by looking at what other people desire. The product is not really what we desire, it's the product seems to promise us the fullness of being that our rival has. So that's why we want the product. So it's different from just a regular commodity. This becomes a commodity that is infused with a religious dimension, a dimension that's able to make us whole and complete. Then we fight over these commodities. We kill each other. The commodities never give us the plenitude of being, so everything repeats. In order for society not to collapse, to crumble, the society develops rituals of scapegoating that basically ritualize this violence and justify that violence. And the justification of the violence is called mythology. The scapegoat weirdly takes on this value of both being innocent and pure and spiritual and good because they rid the community of violence, and also they take on the aggression, so they're seen as dirty and impure and need to be got rid of. So there's this interesting dialectic within the scapegoat, whoever that individual is. They are both guilty and innocent. They've got a, so they're sacred. There's a sacred dimension to the scapegoat. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a background to at least Girard's kind of central idea. I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I've covered everything I wanted to cover there. Yeah. So what happens next? Well, for Girard, as societies develop, the truth of this scapegoating mechanism starts to be glimpsed. And so he looks at Judaism and he says the Jewish community, you can see already that there is a revelation of truth. And by revelation of truth, he means that we begin to realize that the scapegoat is not the problem, they're the solution to a problem. That the scapegoat actually carries our own violence. Our own originary violence of the community is put onto the scapegoat. The scapegoat is not guilty. So in mythology, the scapegoat is the gods demand a sacrifice, right? The gods ordain the sacrifice. The sacrifice is sacred, right? So that's the mythology, is that the sacrifice is desired by the gods, is justified, and is basically what is required in order to bring harmony and peace to the society. What you find within the Hebrew scriptures is increasingly this notion that actually the scapegoat is innocent. The scapegoat is the carrier of our own violence, our own destructive tendencies, our own mimetic rivalries. And this culminates for Girard in Christ, in the crucifixion. So for Girard in the crucifixion, this is revealed. The primary interesting thing about the crucifixion is not that someone is murdered, is tortured, or anything like that. It's a theological dimension. It's that the early church defined Jesus as God, and God is the scapegoat, and we put God up there on the cross. So our violence, our aggression, put the innocent Christ onto the cross. And so what Girard is saying Christianity is, in a sense, is Christianity is the experience of being confronted with our own violence that we put onto others, we put onto scapegoats, we put out there, but the recognition of that violence that is part of us, this originary violence that we cannot shake. And it is the taking on of that violence, the recognition of it, not the running from it. And that is what the crucifixion is. Christ is innocent. We put Christ on the cross. We are guilty of that. It's not that the scapegoat is guilty, it's we are guilty. And that's why Girard says, Christianity is true in the sense of the true religion. He's not making any claims historically about something that happened in reality or not. He's simply talking about truth as the revelation of our originary violence. And this revelation is enough for Girard to break it. And this is interesting in psychoanalysis. There's an early type of psychoanalysis that thinks the same thing, that if you're confronted with the pleasure that you get out of your self-destruction, destruction of others, right? Because there's a pleasure, there's something you're getting out of it. If you're confronted with that secret pleasure, it robs you of the pleasure, and you won't kind of do the act. So take an example, somebody, they get secret pleasure out of always giving to their friends and their family, and they're always being sacrificial, they're always bringing gifts everywhere they go, they're always like putting on meals that are spectacular, but they're always giving themselves so much that it's destructive to them, and it's like that's too much, right? But it doesn't look like they're getting pleasure out of it, like they're suffering. This is terrible. They're always so self-sacrificing. But within analysis, of course, what you're doing is you have to uncover the secret pleasure that the person is getting out of that self-destructive activity, which is maybe the pleasure of getting people to feel that they need them, to a weird form of revenge, that look how nice I am and look how badly you treat me. I mean, all of these like secret pleasures that we can get out of that activity. And when you're confronted with your secret pleasures, it robs the activity of its enjoyment. And it robs the activity of its enjoyment, and therefore it weakens the activity, right? And that often happens. So in a similar way, that's what Girard is saying, is when we realize the secret pleasure we get out of scapegoat mechanism, making someone an enemy, And sometimes it can be a justified scapegoat. That makes it even harder to see. And whenever the scapegoat actually is a pretty bad person, then you can pretend that it's not because they're a scapegoat, it's because they're a bad person, right? But when we realize that we get pleasure out of this putting the violence onto somebody else, it can rob us of that pleasure and therefore destroy the scapegoating mechanism. And that's, for Girard, his reading of Christianity. Now, he has an interesting engagement with Nietzsche, which I also want to mention. And once I outline this, then I can go on to the critique. For Nietzsche, one of his famous ideas is the idea of resentment. And he calls it ressentiment. He uses the French term. So he's talking about a form of resentment in a technical sense. And for Nietzsche, basically what happens is, if you have a community that is free and is strong and is pursuing its desires, this is a good thing, right? But if that society is then enslaved, that society cannot show its anger and aggression, because otherwise you'll be killed, right? So what you do is you take that strength and you turn it inward, and it becomes resentment. So you can't actively kill your enemy because you're enslaved by them. So what you have to do is you resent your enemy. Now for Nietzsche, there's no problems with resentment. Resentment is a natural emotion. Nietzsche's very pro natural emotion. So for Nietzsche, resentment is not the problem. He calls it ressentiment, which is resentment turned into a spiritual dimension, or resentment turned into a pathological condition, or resentment that is ontologized. In other words, resentment isn't just something you feel towards somebody briefly. They've got a job that you would really like and you're a bit pissed off, right? You go, I kind of resent them, but it passes. Resentment is whenever it colors your entire existence. Resentment is how you see the world. It's how you see yourself and everybody else. It colors everything. That's where it becomes like it takes on a spiritual dimension, a pathological dimension. It becomes the lens through which you see everything. And Nietzsche says that this happened to the Israelites when they were enslaved by the Egyptians. It's very natural to have resentment against the Egyptians, but what happened is that resentment was spiritualized into resentment. And then what happens is you begin to create a religion of the weak against the strong. A religion that hates everything that is good and strong and mighty and turns against those who are doing well and wants to bring everybody down. Right? So kind of victim mentality is basically it. Now for Nietzsche, it's not Judaism that is the zenith of this. He sees that actually in Judaism there is a non-resentful form of religion that is perverted by slavery, but that Christianity is the kind of the eruption of the religion of resentment. And so for Nietzsche, Christianity is the child of resentment. And you see this for Nietzsche in the sense that Christianity turns against everything that is noble and strong and good. It sees strength as bad, as weakness, nobility as pride and arrogance. It wants to take down the strong. It wants to put those people who have something in this world into hell, to condemn them to eternal death. And so Nietzsche sees in Christianity, although he sees Christ as an exception to this, but in Christianity as it's expressed, he calls it a slave morality, a resentful type of existence. But René Girard, who's a close reader of Nietzsche, he turns this around and he says, well, in relation to mimetic rivalry and the crucifixion, Christianity is not the child of resentment. It's actually the mother of resentment. And it's the mother of resentment in a very particular way. Girard says that the insight of Christianity, which is the end of the scapegoating mechanism, confronting us with our originary violence, theology, original sin, right? Confronting us with our original violence, ripping the enjoyment of that originary violence from us, freeing us from the scapegoat mechanism. That's the meaning of Christianity. That's the crucifixion. However, this insight happens within a scapegoating world. So if the crucifixion is the sacrifice of sacrifice itself, the end of this sacrificial system, it happens within a sacrificial system. So it is not fully understood. So most atonement theories, for example, are ways of trying to refit this rejection of sacrifice into a sacrificial model. So Girard basically says that Christianity could only be partially understood, and actually it takes hundreds, thousands of years to get the full insight, for it to permeate society. So although Christianity over the first few hundred years had an impact on violence in society, it just was a halfway measure. Violence became resentment, but resentment has to become forgiveness. Forgiveness being the giving up of this notion of the plentitude of the other's being, the freedom from this desire for what the other has, the letting go of the other's being, right, which is all part of forgiveness. That he says, well, that's really the task of theology, in a sense, is over the course of thousands of years to uncover the radical meaning of the crucifixion. So that's what theology is, the uncovering, or what it should be, the uncovering of the truth of the crucifixion, the peeling away the mythology that surrounds us, that surrounds that narrative, and helping that permeate society through liturgical practice. Right? So there's I suppose a reading of theology at its best, peeling back the mythology of the crucifixion, revealing it as the truth of the originary violence of society, through the practices of church life, helping us walk into that insight, giving up violence and resentment through forgiveness, and by doing that in communities all over the world, having a positive impact on the political dimension, where we see that breakdown of the scapegoating mechanism within politics itself. All right, there is an overview of Girard. I hope that was clear. I put a lot of stuff into it, but the main stuff is, of course, we are mimetic creatures. We have mimetic desire. We desire what others desire. We ultimately desire their plentitude of being. We feel that we're lacking. We imagine what's called a non-castrated other, some other who has the thing that will make them happy. We envy what they have, the commodities they own. We think that those commodities will give us that plentitude of being. We then can often kill the other to get their commodities. But those commodities then, as soon as we get them, their religious dimension disappears. We realize that it's a type of fiction. And in fact, one final thing I'll say on that is Girard has this beautiful line where he says, he imagines some guy who's walking through a rocky field, and he's picking up rocks because he thinks that beneath one of the rocks there is a treasure, a really amazing treasure. But he overturns all of these rocks and never finds the treasure. So eventually he desires and he seeks a stone that he cannot lift. And so the image is of a guy who is trying to pick up a stone that he cannot lift. And the reason for that, and this is very similar to psychoanalysis, is that Girard says that we always feel to get the religious dimension of the commodity, right? Every commodity we get does not give us the plenitude of being that we desire it to give us. So every time we get the thing, it's a failure. Now, it's a contingent failure. We go out with this person, we go out with that person, we get that job, we get that product. Contingent failures. But eventually, we move from contingent failure to a necessary failure. So we move from what you could call the failure of desire to the desire for failure. Right? So the failure of desire is that every time I get a commodity, it doesn't work. The desire for failure is the attempt by the individual to prevent this constant disillusionment by having something that is so out of reach. They can continue the illusion that if they got it, then everything would be great. So this is an explanation for why people self-sabotage, right? Is that there's something worse than not getting what we want, and it is the idea that we could never get what we want, that it doesn't exist at all. So in order to keep the fantasy alive of a commodity that will give us wholeness and completeness, we therefore make sure that we never are able to get the thing that we really want. So that's another dimension to Girard that I think is very, very important. Okay, so now let's get on to a critique or supplement to Girard's work. So the way I want to describe this is, I think that Girard, he's right about the whole resentment thing, right? That if you only go halfway with the crucifixion, yes, it exposes your violence, but it doesn't get rid of your desire for wholeness and completeness. It just means that you realize that everything you try to get won't fulfill that. It exposes that the scapegoat mechanism is our own violence, right? But you still can be resentful. So I'm not going to kill you. I realize that if I kill you, it's not endorsed by the gods. It's not something that is justified. It is a great evil. I can still resent you. I'm just not going to kill you, right? Now, this is where Zizek comes in. So Zizek says, well, Girard has only gone halfway, because you are not freed from resentment by the revelation of the scapegoat mechanism. In order to be free from resentment, you have to be confronted with the reality that the other person is just as riven with desire as you are. That there is no individual with a plenitude of being. That this is a fantasy. It's only when you grasp that you can get to forgiveness. That violence becomes resentment, and resentment becomes forgiveness. Forgiveness is the recognition that the other lacks as well. And the reason why that's forgiveness is because it detaches you from the excessive desire of the other and the violence you want to do to the other. And one of the ways that Zizek approaches this is through defining the difference between envy and jealousy. So envy has three elements. It's a triangular thing, and I've mentioned this. So in envy, there is me, there is you, and there is what you have. And I envy you because I want what you have, and I want to get rid of you in order to get that partner, that job, that money, that product. Jealousy is kind of has two elements, not three. In jealousy, there is me and there is you in relation to your commodity, your object, right? The best way to think about this is in terms of love, right? In envy, right, I fancy your partner. So there is me, there is you, and there's your partner. In jealousy, I don't fancy your partner. I desire the oneness that you and your partner have. So it's not your partner that I want, it's not that object that I want. It is the oneness, the wholeness, the happiness that the two of you seem to have. And this is what Shizek digs down into. He says that until you can break jealousy, until you can break the fantasy that there is someone out there who has the thing that will make them complete, the person, the job, the whatever, then resentment will never be able to disappear at all. There will be resentments, and violence will eventually erupt again. And take an example of somebody in my line of work who's a writer, and maybe they're like really popular, they've sold millions of copies of books, they're doing really, really well, and I look at them and I think, my goodness, look at that, they've got the thing, they're selling all these books, they've got this lifestyle that I would love. But then I meet them and I realise that, yeah, maybe they've got a better life and they're happier maybe than I am, but they're still just human, and they still have their doubts and their unknowing and their bad times and all of that, that they are kind of like me. That realization breaks resentment. Now, it might not break resentment. I might still go, oh, I wish I had their life and all of that, but it breaks resentment. I no longer have this fantasy that they have this incredible life that I would love. Now, this brings us to Shizek's notion of the crucifixion. Because just like Girard, Shizek isn't interested really in the theological dimension, the confessional church, what it says. Shizek says that actually the crucifixion has this element built into it. And and if it didn't, he wouldn't be interested. But as a philosopher, he goes, oh no, there's a dimension that Girard hasn't quite grasped. And of course, it's the dimension of, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because for Shizek, these words describe the moment when we experience God as divided. That God is divided against God's self. That God is not one with God. That it's not that I experience a distance from God, it's that God experiences a distance from God. That the separation that I feel between myself and the source of all things is actually a separation that exists within the source of all things. And Shizek says that this then is really the crux of the crucifixion. That whenever, basically we have idols everywhere, we have gods everywhere. The gods are the things that promise wholeness and completeness. The gods are those beings that have wholeness and completeness. When you go out and you look at somebody and you're like, oh my goodness, their Instagram life, they have the thing. Not they've got a better life than you, but they have the life that I need, right? They're a god to you. And the commodities that they have are like religious commodities. And Shizek is saying that the crucifixion is the death of gods and the freedom from religious commodities. In other words, it is the recognition that God, that whatever we make as God, is internally riven, just like us, and that the commodities that they have that seem to promise wholeness and completeness won't give us that. So Christianity then is the experience of the freedom from the scapegoating mechanism, the founding violence of culture, the resentment, Nietzsche's notion of resentment, the internalization of that anger, and through forgiveness. And forgiveness is simply the experience of the other and all big others, all gods, as being internally inconsistent. That's why, for Shizek, he says you can only be an atheist by passing through the Christian experience, because for him, atheism is the recognition of the non-wholeness, the rupturing of all reality, and he says that is the Christian insight. on the crucifixion. So it sounds like, it can sound counterintuitive when you first hear it, but that's his interest in Christianity. So let me make sure I've got everything here. Yeah, the theological cure then is this freedom from the idea of the plentitude of being of the other. Now for Zizek, this is not necessarily religious. This is how contemporary society runs. So, contemporary society is religious because we're surrounded by religious commodities that promise us wholeness, completeness, whether it's certain spiritual practices, certain car, a holiday, whatever it is. We're surrounded by metaphysical and religious commodities that promise us wholeness and completeness. And that the Christian experience is what will free us as a society from that and from all the violence that results, from the violence against ourselves, the violence against others that results from this notion. And actually, we don't have time to do this, but you can read this map onto contemporary political events. I mean, there is always like the other who has what you want, or who's threatening to take it away. Right? There is this the immigrant who's going to take our jobs, or who is lazy and going to take our welfare, or whatever. It's like the other who's going to, and it's mutually contradictory. As Zizek says, it's like they're lazy and they're going to take welfare. They work harder than everybody else. They're going to take our jobs. Doesn't matter. It's like the other has the thing, and the violence that ensues from that. So the technology of church is a technology through preaching and sermons and prayer. The technology of church is precisely designed to draw people into the theological cure, which is the recognition of the originary violence, the freedom from the resentment that originary violence creates within us, through the forgiveness of that originary violence, the forgiveness of sin, which is the occurrence of realizing that the other is also incomplete, which weirdly then frees you from this over attachment to them. Now again, say it's not about saying that we're all equal. Now you can actually go, well, I do resent that person. That person shouldn't have that, and let's talk about how society should run. But it's the breakdown of resentment, which is, I say, the spiritualization, the spiritual condition of resentment, not contingent resentment, but resentment made necessary. Okay, I think I've covered everything I want to cover. I'm going to look to see if there's any questions from people who are watching this live. Give me 1 second as I refresh. Oh, Jason says, I find that the Olympics are a great example of Girard's theory. They offer a safe place for all the countries to enter into conflict, aka competition, absolutely, where all the global political tensions can be resolved through rituals of winning and losing. Yeah, absolutely, Jason. In our contemporary society, yes, sports is one of the ways that scapegoating occurs in a non-violent way, in kind of like a healthy way. And it's interesting because you could say, and anybody who is better read in Zizek might, or in Girard might kind of like, kind of want to chirp in on this at some stage, maybe on the Facebook page afterwards. But for Girard, there is a way of like overcoming the scapegoating mechanism entirely, but in society we haven't got to that stage yet. But we have found healthy ways of doing this, and the healthy ways are sports, international sports. The unhealthy ways are, of course, war. But ultimately, I suppose if you read Girard, you'd be saying there is ultimately a way for communities to and they still enjoy sports, but not require the scapegoating mechanism, to be freed from that entire thing. But yeah, I think sports is a great example of how it plays itself out in very safe ways. Because, why else are we interested in sports? They're completely ridiculous. Somebody kicking a ball one side to the other side of a field. I mean, you have to kind of ask yourself, what is going on that makes it so appealing to us? And Girard's theory probably really, really helps with that. Okay, I hopefully that kind of has clarified both what Girard is about, why he's so important in religious studies and theology, is that he's given an atonement theory that I think is better than a lot of the other atonement theories, that is precisely about confronting us with our violence and helping us overcome that. This is a weirdly atonement theory that doesn't require any supernatural beliefs, but it also doesn't get rid of them. There are Girardians who are confessional Christians, and there are Girardians who would never darken the door of church. His explanation makes sense purely from a rational and historical, logical and biological perspective, and it has a deep insight. But I think if you supplement it with Zizek's understanding of my God, why have you forsaken me, and the significance of that, not simply that we realize our own violence and are confronted with that, and therefore the pleasure of our violence is ripped from us, but also that we realize that the other is incomplete like us. Then that is where resentment can itself become forgiveness. And that kind of is the ultimate message of Christianity, the theological cure, the forgiveness of sin, which is living outside the demands and the violence of mimetic desire as it is expressed culturally, religiously, and politically. And that's why, of course, for Zizek, it has a profound economic dimension in relation to consumerist capitalism, which is full of religious commodities, promising what church used to promise, but very few people believe that the church can offer that wholeness and completeness now, but an increasing number of people think that fame or money or fitness or beauty or any other thing will do it. All right, thank you very much for tuning in to this Paro seminar. Next month we're going to look at doubt and ambiguity in relation to theology, and then I've got a few other ones that I really want to look at as well, so I'll be putting details of those up in the coming weeks. Thanks for checking in, and I will talk to you all again very soon.